Hey everyone, welcome to Science-Based Fitness. My name's Adam. Thanks for checking out the channel. What we have today are 3 tips that are going to help you increase hypertrophy. Now, these aren't just 3 generic tips like eat protein. As important as that is, I want to give you more specific tips that are going to be relating to exercise and principles and methods that you can apply to your own exercises. So let's get into it. Hypertrophy is one of the big 2 questions people always ask. How do I get bigger? And the other one's, how do I get stronger? My last video covered 3 tips on how you can increase strength. If you haven't seen that, it's going to be in the descriptions. I'll link it, or you can go check it out right on the channel. So today we're going to start with those 3 tips. So tip number 1 for hypertrophy. Tip number 1, working within the optimal rep range. What is the best rep range when trying to gain size? I think the exercise science community has learned over the past few decades things aren't as rigid as they once thought. I showed in my strength video that you can still have significantly higher strength gains when using higher reps, but we still have an optimal range, and for strength we showed that that's a lower rep range with heavier weights. Now when it comes to hypertrophy, what is the ideal rep range you should be working at, and what does science have to say on the topic? Found a meta-analysis by Greg Nuckols. It's from 2016. It's linked in the description if you want to read it. There's a lot to unpack in this analysis, and I whittled it down to a few key points that I feel best illustrate the answer that we're looking for. And it comes to this. This is a main comparison between moderate reps, which this analysis identified as 6 to 15 reps, and high reps, which is considered 15 or greater in this analysis. So what this shows is that out of the 16 calculable effect sizes, 9 supported moderate rep ranges were more efficient for hypertrophy, while 3 supported high rep ranges being more efficient for hypertrophy, and then the other 4 calculable effect sizes were tied. The correlation wasn't as strong as I was hoping we would find. And even Greg Nuckols stated as a takeaway for him was, quote, the hypertrophy range of roughly 6 to 15 reps per set may produce slightly better results per unit of time invested than low reps and high rep work. However, on the whole, the advantage you get from working in the hypertrophy range isn't nearly as big as people seem to think. Maybe a roughly 10 to 15% advantage per unit of effort invested at most. End quote. This analysis included a great graphic I had to include. I think it really speaks on this topic, and here it is. This is basically how I perceived rep ranges when I first started lifting, and I think this is a common perception. As I mentioned earlier, things are a little bit less rigid than we originally thought. And this is currently how we probably should perceive this. So we do see that the 6 to 15 rep range is typically the most optimal way to increase hypertrophy at the fastest rate. So I personally would recommend alternating rep ranges occasionally. This will keep your workouts from getting stale and also provide a varying stimulus to the body. Tip number 2, train to failure with certain loads. When hypertrophy is your goal and you're choosing a rep range to work in, it's important to know what level of effort will you need to maximize these results. I used this study in my strength video, and the study basically looked at quadricep muscle growth and strength. So we're only going to focus on the actual growth portion of the data here. The study wanted to figure out, if you equal volume, do you need to train to failure with light loads and heavy loads? It's kind of a mixed answer, actually. The answer is no for heavy loads and yes for lighter loads. So what we're looking at here are 4 separate groups of participants that are being measured. We can see on the left here in the pre-measurement groups, all of the groups are roughly equal. But when we look at the post-measurement groups after the study was completed, only one group seems to be lagging behind, and that happens to be the light load stopping shy of failure. Now, this is only one study, But from my research, it does seem to be pretty well studied, and it does look like stopping shy of failure when lifting lighter weights is a little bit more detrimental to hypertrophy. So as I mentioned before, I would personally be alternating rep ranges occasionally, so this is just something to keep in mind when you are mixing in those lighter loads. Tip 3, do multi-joint movements before single joint movements. To say simply, do a bench press before a tricep extension. Do a pull down before a bicep curl. Now, this is a principle that I've always mixed into my workouts, and this is a principle that I mix into my own clients' workouts. Now, I did some research to try to find some studies on this, and there were not a lot. I found one study that looked at multi-joint movements before single joint movements to see exactly what we could find. So let's see what we found. In a study titled Effects of Order of Resistance Exercise on Muscle Hypertrophy in Young Adult Men, looked at exactly that. Now, I want to give you a breakdown on why I believe it works this way by looking at the fact that the synergist muscle in the multi-joint movement, in this case the bicep, is depleted of ATP prior to the agonist. When we do the single joint movement first, we are starting with depleting the bicep even more, with limiting the ability to use the back in the pull down. Simply said, our biceps assist with the pull down. If we start with using a large portion of the energy in our biceps, it could interfere with getting a good workout in our back. Now, I personally debated including this tip because the study only ended up finding a 3% increase in hypertrophy in favor of the multi-joint group. Now, this is actually deemed statistically insignificant, but there's a few reasons I did add this. One has to do with the length of the study. The study only took place over a 6-week period and still showed a 3% increase. I'm just hypothesizing, but I believe if this study was taken for a longer time period, you would have seen a statistical significance on hypertrophy. The point of these tips are to kind of help you optimize your training via any pathway possible. Hope you guys liked the video. Hopefully you have a better understanding of why you do certain things first, or maybe you have a better understanding of how to increase your own hypertrophy. So if you have any questions, any comments, please leave them in the comment section, and we'll see you guys next time. Have a good day.